Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Major updates up and down the grid. Max Verstappen spotted driving a Mercedes, although not their Formula 1 car quite yet. But also, what about Red Bull former team boss Christian Horner and where he is going to go next? Over the last few months, all the rumours, maybe Ferrari, maybe Aston Martin. But after Helmut Marko decided to not go quietly into the night, with all the drama coming out about Red Bull over the last few days, it now looks like Horner to Alpine could be his most likely destination. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. This is Portimao and we're going back over the next couple of years. It's been confirmed that in 2027 and in 2028 Portimao in Portugal will be back on the calendar. So this was rumoured last night. A couple of sources said that this is pretty out of nowhere, to be honest, right? We didn't really see this coming. We know that there are many countries in discussion with Formula 1 about getting a Grand Prix. There's probably never been a time like this where countries really want to throw their hat in the ring to make this happen as much as it is presently the case. But this somewhat came out of nowhere. Then this morning, F1 tweeted the Portuguese flag, and shortly afterwards they confirmed that Portimao is officially returning. So what do we think about this, right? It's definitely turned a lot of heads, this announcement. As I say, this was a bit of a surprise. Effectively, it is replacing Zandvoort for those couple of years. Look, this is not a 10-year contract like we have other circuits that may or may not be good circuits having in Formula 1 at the moment. But Portimao is a, frankly, beautiful and also purpose-built racing track. And I'm relatively cynical about this decision, but I will take the positives, right? That we have a new announcement for a track back on the calendar. We've raced at Portimao before. Notably, well, we'll talk about a couple of the Grand Prix that happened towards the end of the era of Mercedes dominance, let's put it that way. But it's not a street track, right? We're not going to Bangkok and doing a street circuit, or we're not going somewhere else. This is a purpose-built racetrack. Now, is it the best racetrack that we could go to? There is talk, of course, about Hockenheim, or could we go back to Sepang? What about Istanbul Park in Turkey? These are other Grand Prix that could potentially return. Portugal and Portimao, it's an acceptable track. I think, look, I will definitely take it over another street circuit, but as I say, I'm relatively cynical about this. I don't think Portugal is great for racing. As I say, it looks very pretty. It has a lot of elevation change. You don't really get the picture of that from this image quite well. You kind of do, but there's a lot of elevation change. It's a track that works very well for the motorbikes, right? I mean, turn 1 works very well. Turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. But really the overtaken opportunity here is into turn 3. That's the tighter hairpin. With Formula 1 cars, there's not as much heavy braking into turn 1 as you might expect from this above view. Then you've got a very tricky section to go up the hill on the left-hander where you're struggling to get on the power because of the way that the corner cambers and going uphill. Then there's a heavy braking zone into the next turn. Then it goes around Sector 2, Sector 3. These are some of the corners where Kimi Räikkönen famously made a load of those passes a few years ago. And then towards the end of the lap, again, lots of elevation changes, not too many opportunities to make overtakes happen, I think, in a Formula 1 car. But I'd prefer this than Miami, right? Like, okay, I'm a bit sad that Zandvoort is going, but that's just the nature of the business and everything that's happening there. Would I take this over Miami? Yeah, absolutely. Would I take this over many of the other purpose-built tracks that we still do have on the calendar? No. So, you know, I have mixed opinions about it, and tweet your thoughts in the comments. This was the 2020 race, just out of interest. I don't know that it was a different time then with different cars and a different era of dominance, but Hamilton won the Grand Prix by 25 seconds over Valtteri Bottas. Max was third. Charles Leclerc was the only other driver who avoided getting lapped by Hamilton. Everyone else got lapped. Latifi was lapped twice. Kvyat was lapped twice. You know, it wasn't the best Grand Prix you've ever seen in your life, let's put it that way. Just to quickly mention then, what are the contracts that we currently have? What is the calendar going to look like in 2027 and 2028? So Imola is not coming back. There is a rumour that Imola might come back instead of Madrid if the Madrid circuit isn't ready for next year. So we might not have seen the last of Imola just yet. But Barcelona, unfortunate as it is, because I actually really love that track, will be coming to an end for Madrid after 2026. Same story with Zandvoort. Vegas's contract is actually up in 2027, but I would expect that to be renewed. We've got Portimao 27-28, Suzuka, and then we go further down. It's nice to see that Monza, Hungary, Silverstone, Kota, etc., Canada, they've got all very long-term deals. The same story in Australia. For some reason, Miami has a contract until 2041. Don't really, well, I do understand the reason for that. Everyone understands the reason for that. But these are all the Grand Prix that have their contracts for, in many cases, a very long time indeed. So the grid is, or the calendar is looking something like this. This is not in order, but just to keep in mind that for 2027, these are the 23 races that have contract for 2027. So of course we don't know the order, although I would presume that Abu Dhabi is probably not going to be the first Grand Prix, and it's probably going to be the last one of the season. But there is room, is what we're trying to say here, with Imola going, and with obviously Zandvoort going, and who knows what happens if Madrid actually properly gets off the ground. I imagine that it will, but you know, I'm kind of hoping that it doesn't, but it is what it is. There's a spot, right? There's a spot open. Who knows, in 2027 we might have more than 24 Grand Prix anyway. We could be pushing up to 25. I'm sure that Stefano Domenicali might well be in favour of making that happen. There's certainly enough interest to make it work. Where else should we go? I think if I had to choose, I would probably say Istanbul Park in Turkey, but I know that people are going to have all sorts of opinions on that. Kyalami, for example, people want a South African Grand Prix or just an African Grand Prix in general. There's big support to see Sepang return, the Malaysian circuit, among many others. So we'll see how it goes from here. This is Max Verstappen. So he was at Estoril today doing some laps in a GT3. Now this is not a Mercedes. We will see the Mercedes in a second. This is a Ferrari 296 that he's driven before with Verstappen on the side. There's also, however, a few minutes later, another bit of footage of him in a Mercedes GT3 car. Although maybe not the best lap to record because he has, let's just say that's not quite the optimal racing line. But still something to see, right? I mean, this is just what Max does. The season's over. He's talking a little bit to the press and he's decided, you know what, let me get back out on track because this is just what he does in the off-season. He's got a lot of things, I'm sure, to prepare. And maybe he prefers the handling of the Ferrari to the Mercedes based on this evidence anyway. And maybe Toto Wolff has a couple of thoughts on that. But Toto Wolff, I'm sure, will mainly be rather satisfied because, you know, here he is in a Mercedes GT3 doing some laps in the light rain. And this has raised a couple of questions as to what Verstappen is going to do if he does more GT3 racing next year. We saw him do a little bit at Nürburgring this year. Of course, there's plenty of F1 Grand Prix to still keep an eye on, but let's imagine the next season isn't going so well. Even Helmut Marko said it this year, that to keep Max happy, they had to let him go and do his GT3 racing stuff to keep him ahead in the game for Formula 1, which is kind of interesting. For many drivers, it would be the other way around. They would not be doing anything else but focusing on F1. But for Max to actually still want to be alive, I don't know, like he needed to do something else in addition to what was at that time a pretty challenging Formula 1 season. Then it turned around. Next year, he may well continue. I mean, he's talked about continuing doing some GT3 racing. The rumour is that they might be switching to Mercedes rather than, you know, Ferrari, right, that Verstappen was driving this time around. So that'd be very interesting, and it's definitely something to think about from the Toto Wolff side. Just, you know, the idea with all these rumours that Max, if he does GT3 stuff next year, either himself or with Verstappen.com or with his like Redline Sim team, whatever the case is, if they end up switching to a Mercedes machine, then maybe that does or does not say anything about what his future in Formula 1 might be. It's also worth noting that his garage at Estoril today had the following number on it, and we could see very clearly number 3. So it does appear that is the number that Max Verstappen is looking to move forward with. There will need to be some agreement from Daniel Ricciardo to allow that to happen earlier than it would otherwise. There will have to be some comments, I'm sure, from Max Verstappen and some discussion and document sign or whatever to get that to happen. But it does look like it can and probably will, right? I think many people would have expected him to go back to 33, but he always ran the number 3 in karting. That was the number he wanted to have when he came to Formula 1, but he couldn't because it was taken, so he went for 33 instead. But obviously 33 became his brand for a long time. So, but it does appear that he's going back to 3 after all. Of course, not yet officially confirmed. And it's not like he can just easily take it because of the rule. Danny Rick was not out of the sport 2 years ago. Therefore, there would have to be some discussion to be had there. Honda Racing, they have a power unit to arrive soon. It's going to only power the Aston Martin cars for the upcoming season, whereas in recent years it's been Red Bull and their sister team Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, Racing Bulls, whatever you want to say. January the 20th, they are set to unveil the power unit, which is kind of interesting. So So they're revealing the F1 power unit. They are maybe going to do a little test, I don't know, show what the noise sounds like in real life. Lawrence Stroll is going to be there in Tokyo, as is Stefano Domenicali. He gets everywhere, doesn't he? I mean, maybe not so much as Mohammed Ben Sulayem, but he's not far off. He, of course, the Formula 1 boss from the FOM management side. So pretty interesting, heading over to Tokyo for that one. That's going to be a pretty big deal, though. I'm sure that if that engine is good, then Aston Martin have a reasonable chance next season to do something pretty surprising. We've got used to the recent standings in the Constructors' Championship. Okay, McLaren have kind of come out of nowhere over the last couple of years to become the top dogs yet again, but it's McLaren, right? Like, we know that McLaren, at least at some point, will be a competitive force in the Formula 1 Championship. Mercedes, Red Bull, obviously Ferrari, all of the guys that we know and very well are familiar with. But further down the grid, it's very interesting because could Williams come back to form? Could Alpine and Renault come back to form? What about, let's say, Audi coming onto the grid, but also especially Aston Martin, and whether that partnership with Honda could work out? So it's definitely not out of the realms of possibility to see wholesale changes in what the competitive picture looks like next year. And, well, Ferrari will be hoping that it looks good for them. Hamilton is said by Takesa here, look, a challenging year, but he came to the team, he gave a Christmas gift to every single person at the team. So this is kind of like Schumacher-esque in terms of what he tried to do in his early days at Ferrari, when, you know, he would go on jogs or whatever it was with all the mechanics and the engineers and just spend a lot of time with the team, getting to know everyone. And it took some time, but it did result in strong loyalty to Schumacher from the team and an increase in the quality of those relationships. And, you know, a couple of years into that, Schumacher and Ferrari started to see some serious success, despite the political complications that continue to cloud things at that organisation. Of course, it would be cynical of me to suggest that Hamilton is giving out Christmas gifts not out of the kindness of his heart, because I think genuinely he wants to give gifts, whatever he's given to these people, sure. But I think Hamilton also recognises to a certain extent that maintaining and strengthening those relationships within the team is going to be critical if he wants any chance, and if the team wants any chance of truly turning things around over the coming seasons. Charles Leclerc's trying his best. He was at Maranello again, doing some sessions in the simulator on the 678, which is next year's Ferrari, although we do not yet know what it's actually going to be called, but it's Project 678 as we understand. Then a tour through the department. So that's the Ferrari update. Questions continuing again as to what's actually going to happen here. Some comments from Arriva Bene, who says when a driver starts playing as the engineer, then it's really over. Of course, Hamilton giving these documents to the team. I don't know if those documents are really Hamilton playing, let's say, engineer, as Arriva Bene describes, but maybe there's part of that. But I think Hamilton generally was speaking from an operational perspective. But again, Hamilton was then told to shut up, effectively, by John Elkann. And Riccardo Patrese says, well, Elkann can say all that all you want, and yeah, you've got the fastest pit stops, congratulations, lads, but what does it matter if you're losing 0.3 a lap in your car pace? I struggle to be optimistic for 2026, says Patrese. So that's the Ferrari update. There was a rumour for some time that Christian Horner could end up here, but that now seems significantly less likely. So there's been talk for some time where Horner's going to go. The other day, Helmut Marko came out with some very strong remarks about the way that Horner was behaving behind the scenes, let's say, in the couple of years leading up to the huge Red Bull civil war and what has happened since. But at the end of the day, Horner is gone. Marko is also gone in the next couple of weeks, but Horner has unfinished business in Formula 1. He was never going to call it a day. When Adrian Newey quit Red Bull, there was quite a lot of talk about, oh, is he going to retire, right? Has he had enough? And my opinion was always, no, he's too competitive for that. And as it turned out, he has come back in, and in many respects, Newey is now more front-facing than he's ever been, becoming the official team principal for the start of next season. But with those conversations, we had some discussions on the channel, and understandably, Newey even himself said, I think it was in Qatar after this whole thing was confirmed, that nothing much is going to change for him. He might be the team principal by name, but in reality, they've left the door open for a CEO, right? They've left the door open for a Zach Brown-esque figure, really, to come into Aston Martin and do all the media stuff, deal with all the sponsors, and all that type of stuff that Adrian Newey does not want to be dealing with, and nor should he if the team wants to maximise his utility in that organisation. So understandably, there was talk, okay, could it be opening the door for Horner? Horner and Newey reportedly are willing to work together again. It might be a bit of a push factor for Max Verstappen. Not sure how keen he would be or Jos would be to join Aston Martin in the eventuality where Horner was there. I'm sure if Jos Verstappen is still having the same opinions on Horner as he used to, that if Max was to join Aston Martin, he would probably ask Lawrence Stroll, I want assurances that Horner is not going to be coming here. But I'm not sure that would be too easy to accomplish. But it may be a different alternative. We know that Horner would never get the power that he wants out of Ferrari. He wouldn't get the equity that he wants out of Ferrari. He could get it at Aston Martin, for sure. That's why that was so compelling as an opportunity. But Alpine was also another valid consideration. You could imagine Briatore and Christian Horner being thick as thieves to a certain extent. And Briatore a while ago said, oh, no, I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing in this rumour that Horner might be coming here. Of course, Aston Martin have said the same thing. Ferrari have basically said the same thing as well. But he's probably going to go somewhere because he could, with this big consortium that he's got behind the scenes pumping some serious money in and the relationships that he's built up, have a 12th team entry. It's possible, but probably rather unlikely. It would be a huge amount of effort. They'd have to have huge backing from manufacturers. It'd have to be accepted. I can't see that making much sense. I think what's more likely is buying out either a whole team, in which case there's really only one option you can try, and that is realistically right now Alpine. They may say, oh no, absolutely, we're committed to Formula One. But everyone knows that Alpine and Renault, if they were offered enough money, they might sell their spot. They might at least sell part of it. They've been moving in that direction. They shut down their engine project. They're now buying Mercedes engines, as we know. Pretty fascinating if Horner became a Toto Wolff customer, by the way. But that is the rumour, that Horner is pushing for a return to Formula One and is in talks with Alpine. Multiple sources confirm. So Alpine are interested, Horner's interested. Would it be his ideal option? I still think Aston Martin could make a lot of sense, and I'm sure that Horner would at least think about that. But maybe Alpine is just more likely, right? Maybe Briatore, who effectively calls the shots, is down for it where Lawrence Stroll isn't necessarily. And Horner would like to take over 24% of the shares currently held by the American consortium Altro Capital, right? So that's pretty fascinating if Horner was to take ownership, maybe with his own backing of investors and whatever, because these Formula One teams are worth billions of dollars nowadays, right? So it wouldn't be cheap for Horner to manage that on his own. But that's all what he wanted, right? To take some equity in a team and help build them up. And maybe Alpine are well positioned, right? We know they can design a solid enough chassis. But yeah, I don't know if I would expect it necessarily. It would be a bit of a strange one. Alpine, obviously, this year, dead last in the Constructors' Championship, right? But maybe Horner sees that as a great opportunity to join a team, take some equity, build them up again. And Alpine, because Renault are so fickle in terms of whether they really want to be here or not at the moment, maybe Horner seems a world like he sees a vision where he can actually make that team into Horner Racing, which is kind of like what I feel like he's always wanted to do. If he joins Aston Martin, or certainly Ferrari, it's never going to be Horner Racing in the way that Red Bull kind of was to a degree. Alpine would give him the opportunity to do that, but it would certainly be an uphill battle. So fascinated to hear your thoughts as ever on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Just one final comment here from Max. 2 points in it in the end, it doesn't matter. 1 point, half a point, or 20 points. You're either pregnant or you're not. You can't be half pregnant, right? So Max has done it again. Thanks for watching as always. Take care, and I'll see you next time.